The Jungle is a great book, but I have to give some quick history. It's one of those books that actually changed, speaking of politics, the course of politics, and also literally changed our lives today. We wouldn't have the society we have, particularly when it comes to food, if it weren't for Upton Sinclair's fabulous book. The premise is simple. It follows one, or it might be multiple, but I think it highlights one. We call them a food worker today, but they have a different term back then. And I want to say it was at the turn of the last century. So I want to say it was 1910. Takes place in Chicago, a couple other places, but mostly in Chicago. And it's in the meatpacking district. Now, the Chicago meatpacking district, I used to live in Chicago, shout out to Northwestern. The Chicago meatpacking district isn't as well known nowadays, but it might have been the biggest one. What's more well known now, though, and maybe even at the time, is the New York meatpacking district. There's also one in LA. I know that. The reason they're called the meatpacking district is because that's where they used to slaughter the cows or the chickens or what have you, mostly cows. I think a lot of it was beef. And his book was an expose on how filthy the beef was being handled. Filthy as in workers were getting cut and none of them are wearing gloves. We're talking people getting hurt and having to get stuff amputated if the thing that they were working with didn't amputate them on their own. We're talking workers who were sick. This was kind of the era, it was either right before or right after, right around the era of influenza, which was at that time the equivalent of COVID today. You can imagine the stuff that was happening. I don't think there was an FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. I think it came out of this book, if I'm remembering correctly. This is like 120 years ago. This was the era of my great-grandmother. Not that far back. Without this book and the congressional hearings, I believe it was Congress, but the federal hearings that happened because of it, the research that was done to find out if the stuff Upton was saying in the book was true. If it wasn't for this a century plus ago, then we wouldn't have warning labels. There wouldn't be, the different food industries wouldn't have to say what's in the food. Now, there's plenty of progress that we've done since then, and plenty of progress, frankly, that we have to go on. Shout out to the American Dietetic Association and other people that I've worked with who are doing amazing work in that regard. But when it came out, it was banned. People thought it was, or I shouldn't say people, governments thought it was unfair and exaggerating, grotesque. I believe even overseas was banned. But then the truth started coming out. And suddenly, at least in most countries, I think it's still banned in some countries. Suddenly it wasn't banned. And Upton Sinclair was considered a hero. But initially he was viewed as, by some organizations, some leadership as a villain. As if he was trying to shut down the beef industry or what have you. Now, if we go back, say 20, 25 years ago, again, if you're one of my older viewers in my age range or older, then you remember a controversy with Oprah and I want to say that Texas beef organization, what have you. And that happened, again, back when Oprah had a regular show about a quarter of a century ago. And she went to court for defamation and had to fly down to Texas from Chicago, speaking of Chicago. The irony is not lost on me that, she was saying that from Chicago, a century after Upton Sinclair was saying the same thing about Chicago. But we all have a long way to go in that regard. This was the first book, though, that I know that really tackled it. And it was from, frankly, a voice that people were willing to hear it from. I suspect that there were other people, particularly whether it's, we'll call them in the modern day migrant workers, my ancestors who, literally were slaving away at things. who were aware of the conditions, who might have been fighting for the conditions, but Upton Sinclair was the messenger at the time who was able to deliver it. And you got to honor that. One of my favorite banned books, I read it ages ago. I think I was in grad school when I read it. If you want to go deeper into the idea, the aforementioned book, Fast Food Nation, one of my favorite books of all time. Top 25 nonfiction book of all time for me. Like, again, and you see I want to show receipts. The corners, the dog-eared corners, which is my trademark. The dog-eared corners and the brown, like, this stayed by my bedside. I usually read it every other year to this day. This also was very instrumental as far as with my own banned book, Porn and Pong, and better understanding how to tell a good story. It is fantastic. It is scary. It will change your life. And Eric Schlosser, shout out to him, definitely the descendant of Upton Sinclair. I'm pretty sure he mentioned Upton Sinclair a few times in this, but it's like you got to see the lineage. Like LL Cool J has a new album that just came out. I'm a big hip hop guy, and it's interesting to have him come out. He's quite a bit older than me, and so I grew up listening to him. It's interesting to have him come out. I think it's his 5th decade having a song or album on the Billboard charts or the equivalent of the charts. But then you see his likeness in a Snoop. You see his likeness in a Kendrick Lamar. Like, you go generation to generation. Upton Sinclair is that guy, and Eric Schlosser is definitely one of his descendants. I recommend both books. If you want more of the classic narrative and understand how things were a century ago, grab Upton Sinclair's book. If you want to know the world we're living in now, which some ways better, some ways worse. Not gonna lie. Sometimes you have to know how the sausage is made. This is a great book. It's also a great read. It's non-put-downable, as we used to say back in the day. Shout out to Eric Schlosser. If you want to better understand how people get into these situations or end up in these environments and are having a challenge with their work, which is what we're really talking about. We're talking about food. We're also talking about a way of living. People were working within slaughterhouses, they used to call them. Now they call it meatpacking. They're working in those areas. They were doing this work because at that moment, there weren't a whole lot of options for them. If you want to understand your own career better and make strong decisions, check out the live that I did, great career books, how to make your best career. I give some good book recommendations to help you on your career and figure out what to do next. And again, with the stuff that people are going through in the jungle, and particularly, again, Fast Food Nation was maybe a quarter of a century ago. Might have been late 90s, very early aughts. I want to say late 90s. We started talking about it wasn't that far back. So think about that as you go ahead and decide what you want to do with your life and how you want to take care of yourself. Because once you read those, that'll definitely make you think about your own life too. I'm entrepreneurial coach Damon Brown. I help you as a side hustler, soulpreneur, otherwise a non-traditional entrepreneur. This is Bring Your Worth TV. I come to you Wednesdays live, 1:11 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Vegas time. You can subscribe for free. What is the book that actually changed your behavior? I'm really curious about this. Hop in the comments. Like one where you read it and you're like, I'm never going to do this again. Or you said, oh, you know what? I'm going to change this. I'm going to go in a different direction. Let me know what your thoughts are. I'm super, super curious about